Sonus Faber Speakers and myself go way back. As some of you guys may know, I used to sell Sonus Faber speakers when I was working at the high-end retail store here in Canada. In fact, when I left the store to pursue my review career, a lot of my previous clients reached out to me and asked me, "Hey Jay, you are very familiar with Sonus Faber speakers. Why don't you review them on your review channel? In fact, you sold me some, so you should definitely review them." So I reached out to Sonus Faber and here I am reviewing the Lumina series. But there's a very specific reason why I am reviewing the Lumina series and not the other Sonus Faber speakers that I have heard for many years. Because Lumina series is a new series in the Sonus Faber line. In fact, it is the most price-conscious speakers they produce today. However, are they good performers for the money in the grand scheme of hi-fi? And also from a perspective of a person who has heard the budget Sonetto line all the way up to the top of the line AIDA speakers, I'll give you my insight today. But a little spoiler alert, I bought a Sonus Faber speaker for the first time. I've sold many Sonus Faber speakers but never bought one for myself. But I bought my first Sonus Faber speakers directly from Sonus Faber after hearing the Lumina 1 speakers. So make sure to click that subscribe button and the bell notification so that you don't miss any of it. And let's get straight to it. So I think it's important to note here that I have no affiliations with Sonus Faber whatsoever. They're not paying me to do this review. They're not giving me the speakers to do this review. They're not compelling me in any way or form or shape to make this a positive review or say anything that is against my beliefs. So I think that's important to point out here, especially in a video like this, because I used to sell Sonus Faber speakers, and that's one of the reasons I avoided reviewing Sonus Faber speakers or speakers that I used to sell, because it may come off too salesy. Because truly, all speakers that I used to sell, I believed in them and that's why I sold them. And I loved the speakers that I sold. In fact, one of the speakers that I sold the most is Sonus Faber speakers, mainly the Sonetto line, because I believed in the craftsmanship and the sonic qualities that went into it. And truth be told, the craftsmanship and the looks that goes into it matters as much to Sonus Faber as the sonic qualities. So with Sonus Faber speakers, not only do they have to sound great, but they have to look great as well. And this is important to them, and they are big, and I mean big, on using natural materials such as wood, stone, and so on. Because they believe that instruments are made of natural wood, and a lot of the famous ones, like the Stradivarius, is using natural wood. So to reproduce a sound that's natural, they believe they need to use natural wood, natural materials to produce sound. And to that effect, Sonus Faber speakers have been always natural sounding to me. And the Lumina 1 speakers are no exception. They are exceptionally natural sounding speakers. And for $900 USD, the craftsmanship that I looked and felt from the speakers and the sonic qualities that came out of it, it made me wonder about the Lumina speakers in general, and also I wanted to review them for you guys, so I bought the next level up, the Lumina 2, which is a little bit of a bigger bookshelf speaker that has a little bit more extension in the low frequency, I assume, but more on that later in my next reviews to come. Now, one of the reasons that made me buy the Lumina 2 is obviously by hearing and looking at the Lumina 1 speaker. And the qualities that Lumina 1 speakers give is quite different from other Sonus Faber speakers. They all sound natural in their own way. However, the Lumina series sound different from the Sonetto line. In fact, if I have to put my finger on it, the Lumina series sound pretty close to a speaker that I really like but couldn't afford at the time, and probably still very hard to afford and really expensive. And that's the Electa Amateur. And no, let's not make the mistake. The Electa Amateurs are much better speakers, both in sound and in the craftsmanship. It's just a much sexier speaker. It is one of my dream speakers. However, the Lumina speaker, the Lumina 1 speaker here for $900 USD provides a lot for its money and gets very close to the sound signature of the Electa Amateurs, which even the Sonetto line didn't do. Now, to my ears, I look for very specific things when I listen to the Electa Amateur, and the Lumina 1 does provide something very close that I look for in that speaker, and that is the upper mid-range and the mid-range in general, of course, but especially that upper mid-range where the strings really hit. When the strings hit, it really gives you that tone of it being right in front of you. And that's a little bit hard to explain, but some speakers that I have heard that does this is, for example, the Totem Tribe Tower speakers or the Metal version 2 speakers. So that's one of the reasons I like the tone on the Totem as well. It doesn't lie to you, it doesn't roll things off, but rather it really gives you that impact of strings and really vibration that you can really feel in your chest. And for such a small, tiny speaker, the Lumina 1 does that. It has life to the sound. It's not a boring sound. Now, to some, this may come across bright or fatiguing. And admittedly, if you are playing these speakers at very rock level, high volumes, then it will become fatiguing in the long run. When it comes to the bass region, certainly there is something to be desired, especially because this is a small speaker. But as long as you're aware that you are getting a small speaker, the bass is surprisingly full sounding and punchy and very fast. No, it does not extend down low as a floor standard or a bigger bookshelf speaker for that matter, but mating it with my Rel T7X subwoofers, two of them, really gave it life and dynamics that really brought it to life. So if you are getting this and you want a full range response, then you may consider getting a subwoofer with it for that absolutely beautiful full range response. And even for someone like myself who does like deep bass extension, I didn't feel like the Lumina 1 speaker was particularly, lacking in bass, or I certainly didn't feel like I was missing out on music. The enjoyment was there, and overall, the lower mid-range and the bass extension, how the bass hits and all that really comes together really nicely to form a very natural and inviting, warm characteristic of a sound. The mid-range is not overly warm, but it certainly has warm characteristic, which does help out. And the vocals sound very natural, very human. That's a lot of the people that hear Sonus Faber speakers say the same thing, but it sounds very human. It is a very delicate sound. It's very inviting, yet kind of smooth, liquid sound. A lot of the things that you will attribute to a very good tube amplifier mid-range is there with the Sonus Faber speakers. Now, with this being said, these speakers are very clean sounding speakers as well, in the fact that the mid-range and the high frequency is also very clear and crisp sounding. The vocals are full-bodied, warm sounding, but at the same time crisp and articulate, and the high frequencies are open and airy at the same time. So it's very, kind of like a very spacious sounding speaker in terms of sound staging because of that characteristic as well. It's a very open sound, has a lot of high frequency extension, so it really does lend itself to having that, really 3D holographic soundstage. If I hear this speaker, I get sound to my left, to my right, all around me instead of just a 2D sound field. It is very three-dimensional. Imaging is just absolutely spectacular, as you can imagine from a small speaker like this. Really incredible depth and width and micro details. The micro details, again, I have to exaggerate because it is absolutely to die for. The micro details on a mini speaker like this is just absolutely sublime. And this is no exception. It's done really well. Really small details are very just, floaty on the air. You hear all these nuances, something that you really don't hear on a floor standing speaker for the most part, unless you get to that really high-end speaker, or something like the Focal or Magical series that really has that, tiny detail retrievals. And while the speaker is not as bright as a B&W Focal or Magical speaker in any sense or form, I find the speaker to be not very fatiguing or bright whatsoever in comparison to those speakers. These speakers have those micro details extremely well done, and really reminds me of something like the ELAC Vela 4.3 speakers, because those speakers with the AMT tweeter really had that open airiness with micro details. Now this is a much more fuller sounding speaker than those, in fact. Now with this being said, the placement on this speaker is something that I can see going very wrong. Now, don't get me wrong, this speaker is not hard to set up since it's a small speaker and you can set them up fairly easily because they're so small. You can pull them out from the wall fairly easily. But I found that the distance between the speakers had to be a little bit wider. I felt that a little too close to each other or too far apart from each other would really ruin the soundstage or imaging portion of the speaker. The tonal balance is still there, just the imaging and sound staging, you really have to play around with the tone. I found that having the speakers towed directly at me sounded best with perfect imaging and really grand sense of scale and sound staging for a speaker this small. Now, of course, compared to a full-sized floor standard, it's not going to have scale. For example, something like the Tecton 210 speakers, which is a full-sized, much bigger speaker, it's going to have a bigger dynamic swing than this speaker. I think that's obviously said there. And as the bass is not going to be, as hard-hitting or extended as those speakers, the scale of instruments and human voices will be smaller on a speaker like this. But I find it that it's more to scale. If you're a little bit more about that realism of having things scale, like instruments, if you were to look at an instrument and actually see the actual size being played, then this speaker is great for that. And the micro details and pinpoint imaging, the center imaging is absolutely to die for on the speaker. If that's important to you, then look no further. Mini monitors is an exceptional way to go. And if you want that bass, you can always add a subwoofer. And not only Sonus Faber speakers, but mini monitors in general are very good at these things. It's just that it's done extremely well on the Lumina 1 speakers here as well. Now, getting into a little bit of the craftsmanship and the technicalities of this speaker. Now, this is a 4 ohm speaker with a sensitivity rating of 84 dB. So yes, this speaker is fairly hard to drive. In fact, it is slightly less sensitive than even the KEF LS50 speakers. So this is gonna require some good amplification with it. It's a true high-end speaker. Don't make the price tag fool you. This speaker, in my opinion, competes with some of these Sonetto speakers that they have. Just different sound signature depending on what the person likes. I find that people that like a more warmer, a little bit more neutral sound characteristic is going to like his Sonetto speakers, and people that like a little bit more excitement, a little bit more tone and balance, a little bit more of that, perfect imaging and sound staging is going to like the Lumina series better. And to that point, the high frequency unit or the 1-inch soft dome tweeter used on the speaker is the exact same one used in the Sonetto line from my understanding. Now there could be a little bit of tweaks here and there, but from my understanding on their webpage and from talking with the Sonus Faber rep, I found that it is very similar or the exact same one from the Sonetto line, which is very impressive considering that this speaker is only $900 USD and the Sonetto line starts at $2,300 US, and that's the starting point for the smallest bookshelf they have in the Sonetto line. And just like the Sonetto line, or virtually all speakers in Sonus Faber's lineup, I should say most Sonus Faber speakers have this damped apex dome tweeter design, which is essentially this little thing that you see here, which is basically just touching the soft dome tweeter, and this basically allows them to extend the high frequency and allow it to be a little bit more extended, because soft dome tweeters, while they have great qualities being soft and easy to listen to, natural sounding, and that's why they use soft dome tweeters as Sonus Faber. However, soft dome tweeters usually have a little bit of that characteristic of being a little bit rolled off on the top end, especially the older soft dome tweeter designs, and many manufacturers have come up with designs to combat that, but this is Sonus Faber's way of doing it, and from my understanding, it took them a lot of R&D, a lot of money and time to find this design and fine-tune it so that it works with their speakers to perfection. So this is the damped apex dome tweeter design that they have implemented even in their budget speaker. Now, I would have been very disappointed if they didn't include it in their budget line. In fact, I wouldn't have even be interested in reviewing it, but here you definitely see it. And so I'm very excited that they included that because that's their signature thing The woofer is going to be a nice little cute 4-inch cellulose pulp based woofer. So this is a basically natural materials like I mentioned before, paper, wood, and stuff like this. The front baffle is going to have a layer of wood. This one is in piano black finish, but other ones have wood veneer on them as well. But basically it's going to be a sandwiched wood construction for the front baffle, which is extremely elegant in my opinion and really does help with the overall aesthetic of this beautiful speaker here. Now the cabinet itself is wrapped in premium leatherette, which is basically fake leather, but very premium, enough to fool me and ask Sonus Faber myself if it was actually real leather. Because I think there are some mistakes that was made in other reviewers. They mentioned that this was leather. It's not actually leather. And I think even on Sonus Faber website, it's indicated that it's leather. I think that was pretty insane considering the price point. But yes, the speaker is not wrapped in real leather. It is leatherette, but very, very premium, enough to fool me that it was actually leather, and I got all excited. One of the main reasons I also bought the Lumina 2 speaker is because it looks very elegant, and if I told anyone this was leather, I think they would believe it. It's that kind of premium quality here. Now it is ported in the front. It's a slot port, and with this porting, again, it is aimed to be closer to a wall and be accommodating to positioning. But again, with positioning, having it close to the wall and the side wall and placement in overall is not a concern. It's more the distance between the speakers and also the toe-in that you have to pay attention to in my experience. Now I did use this on a desktop situation as well, and these are fantastic desktop speakers. Even though they have that little bit excitement on the top end, this speaker sounds phenomenal in near field situations as well. And in near field situations, they don't sound bright whatsoever. They don't sound harsh in any way or form, even though it has those micro details. So you get this large sense of sound staging even if you're near field, which is very unusual. And the imaging is very pinpoint, and the tone is absolutely to die for. And with the right amp pairing, and I emphasize, with the right amp pairing, the high frequency is just smooth enough that for someone who is not very prone to high frequency fatigue, they should be fine, and it really does sound fantastic. And the amplifier that I used was the Burson Timekeeper 3i. Wonderful match with these speakers. It sounded fantastic, and that amplifier provides enough power for these speakers in near field situations that it has enough headroom. It's a smooth sounding amplifier overall and very analog sounding. So it really gave that full body response in near field situation with the bass not really lacking at all because you're in a very near field environment, and the sound staging and the high frequency was just smooth, open, airy, natural sounding. Now when it came to stereo situations, just like in near field situations, you want to kind of go overboard in terms of power with this speaker. And what I mean by that is I found that when I paired amplifiers that were like 50 watts, for example the Rotel A11 Tribute series, I found that the issue was not so much that you couldn't get sound out of it. You definitely get sound out of these speakers with 50 watts. That's not the issue. The issue is it seems to like more power with any speaker. It's not about getting enough volume. It's about the sound quality that comes out of it. And with more power that's driving into these speakers, the more you get. So for example, with the A11 or with amplifiers that are a little bit lower in power delivery, I found that the Lumina 1 speakers suffered from a little bit of that brittle sound, a little bit too bright for my liking, while when I paired up with the Rotel's higher end integrated amplifier, such as the Rotel RA1572 Mark II amplifier that outputs 120 watts per channel into 8 ohms, I found that the sound was overall smoother, still had that excitement, but wasn't bright as much as when it was underpowered. And this was a general cross theme between integrated amplifiers or amplifiers. I found that with less power, the Lumina 1 speakers did come a little bit more strained for power, a little bit stretched for power, I should say. And the high frequency was a little bit strained, a little bit fatiguing, a little bit less air on the top end. While when it had enough power, enough juice to be left over, it sounded much, much better and smoother. And even moving up to something like the NADC298, which is a Class D amplifier based on the Purify module, it just sounded fantastic. The high frequency didn't sound strained. It never sounded bright to me. The high frequency had those all minute details and open sound staging and airiness that was just three-dimensional, but it was never strained or fatiguing because it sounded like it was not having enough juice. So this speaker does demand some power, and just like the KEF LS50, it's not about getting enough volume. I know some people commented in my previous video with the KEF LS50 amplification recommendation video, and people were saying, well, it drives fine with a 50-watt amplifier. Absolutely, it should, but the fact of the matter is, after hearing multiple amplifiers with that speaker, and even with this speaker, I have to say, when a speaker is rated for low sensitivity, it's not just about getting enough sound out of it, it's about delivering enough headroom and power so that it can breathe. And certainly with the Lumina 1 speaker, that's especially true. It is rated for 84 dB in sensitivity, and even if it's not that, the speaker likes power. And you've probably experienced this with some of the speakers like the Picard S400. It's not about getting the volume, it's about getting enough power so that the speakers can deliver the sound it's supposed to deliver at the performance that it's supposed to deliver. So again, I'm rambling here a little bit, but the power is extremely important with a speaker if you want to get full potential out of these speakers. Even if this speaker is a small speaker, don't take it lightly. Even if this speaker is a $900 speaker, don't take it lightly. This is a true high-end speaker. And I've said this about the MagnaPen LRS. A lot of people agree with me on that. I said this about the KEF LS50. It's a true audiophile speaker. It just requires the amplification to be much, much better and much, much higher power, and you will be heavily rewarded. Just because the speakers are cheap doesn't mean that they're not high quality or real audiophile speakers. These are real audiophile speakers, and they deserve a real good amplification. So you'll be heavily rewarded every time you scale up with these speakers, and I recommend at least a 100-watt amplifier for these speakers. Now, there are exceptions, however, when I pair these up with the Line Magnetic 805 tube amplifier. These are about 48 watts per channel or something like that. They're not 100 watts for sure. But with tube amplifiers, not always has to be 100 watts, definitely. It was more holographic and the soundstage was much, much larger. And as with tube watts, which is a term that people go by, it doesn't necessarily transfer exactly directly with solid state wattage. But even then, the high frequency seemed a little bit strained compared to a well-powered solid state amplifier driving these speakers. Depending on the amplification that you go with, make sure that it has one, enough power, and second, if you can, go tubes, because Sonus Faber speakers and tube speakers tend to go really well together, and I really did like the line magnetic combo with this speaker. It's just that it wouldn't be my first choice, I'll be honest with you, because the high frequency seemed a little bit strained. Now, the Lumina 1 speakers are extremely good speakers for low-level listening as well. It's just that the bass is not going to kick in until you get to that mid to high volume levels, but you still get that very nice holographic minute details at low levels. So if you're like someone who likes sound staging and imaging at very low level listening, this is extremely good as well, because it has all those details and nuances floating in the air. Very enjoyable. And I rarely like speakers at low volumes. I really like to listen to speakers at mid to high volumes, and this speaker really excels at all levels of volume. And don't get me wrong, these speakers can get extremely loud, and they play loud and clear and crisp and dynamic. And that's not a word that I use often for such a small speaker, but this speaker really is dynamic. It's punchy when it gets to the high volume levels. Now you may be thinking, how does it perform with poor recordings? With poor recordings, this is not the most forgiving speaker. Let's make that very clear. It is not the most forgiving speaker. However, it's not the least forgiving speaker either. It sits somewhere in the middle. I would say a little bit towards the more forgiving side, just ever so slightly. Because when I play poor recordings, these speakers don't entirely destroy it. It's still enjoyable. It still gives that, lends itself to that mid-range warmth and a little bit of that, natural sound characteristic. But the high frequency being a little bit more open and extended, the recording can get a little bit messy depending on how bad the recording is. So other than that, I really don't have much else to complain about this speaker. I mean, there's no nitpicking that I can do here. This speaker is phenomenal value in my opinion. For 900 USD. You're getting a speaker made in Italy, and not just because it's made in Italy, but the sonic qualities and the, tweeter that's been driven from upper line Sonero speakers. And it does things that even the Sonero speakers can't do, like the micro details, the sound staging, and so on. I just think it's phenomenal value. And I'll put money where my mouth is. I bought the Lumina 2 speakers, which is the bigger bookshelf. So, and I may very much well buy the Lumina 1 speaker here as well in the future, depending on my experience with the Lumina 2 speakers. Because it could be very much that the Lumina 1 speakers does things that the Lumina 2 speakers don't do, and vice versa. Because mini monitors, like I said, do specific things very well. Micro details, sound staging, imaging, just to die for. So depending on that, I'll buy both or keep the Lumina 2s. But more on that later in the later episodes of Jay's audiophile journey, I guess. So that's pretty much it for me. Thank you for watching. Make sure to click that like button. It does help us out tremendously and it doesn't cost you anything. And also consider joining our Patreon to keep us independent and keep our reviews going. Thank you very much, and I'll see you guys on the next one.